But I hadn't touched a woman in 20 years. The morning sun rose slowly over the wide, empty fields, casting a golden light over the old farmhouse. Birds chirped somewhere in the distance, and the wind moved gently through the tall grass. Inside the house, John, a man in his late 50s, sat at the kitchen table, sipping his black coffee. His hands were calloused from years of work on the farm, but now they rested idly on the table. For 20 years, John had lived a quiet, simple life, tending to his animals, fixing fences, and keeping the farm in order. He hadn't touched a woman in 20 years, not because he didn't want to, but because life had taken him down a path of solitude and routine. He had grown used to it, and he told himself that this was the life he had chosen. John looked out the window at the cows grazing in the field. They were his pride and joy, the companions he had relied on for years. Every morning he followed the same routine: feed the animals, check the fences, and make sure everything was in order. He liked the predictability of it, the quiet rhythm of life that no one could disturb. It was peaceful, yes, but sometimes, in the deep silence of the farm, he felt a pang of loneliness.
Bird.
He hadn't realized how much he had missed human connection until it had been gone for so long. That morning, however, something unusual happened.
A car appeared on the dusty road that led to the farm. It was small, slightly worn, but it carried someone unfamiliar. The figure stepped out, a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, with a determined look in her eyes. She walked quickly, carrying a small bag, and approached the farmhouse. John felt a sudden tension in his chest. Visitors were rare. Strangers even rarer. And women. Well, it had been a long time since he had interacted with one in any meaningful way. John set down his coffee and wiped his hands on his worn-out apron. He stepped outside, leaning slightly on the wooden railing of the porch. The woman looked at him, her expression both hopeful and a little nervous.
"Hello," she said. Her voice was calm but carried a note of urgency.
I heard you have a farm here, and I was hoping you could help me. My cows. They need milking, and I don't have anyone to help.
John raised an eyebrow, unsure if he had heard correctly.
You need me to help milk your cows? He asked, his voice a mixture of surprise and skepticism. He had milked cows all his life, but it had been decades since anyone had asked for his help. And now, a young woman was standing on his porch, expecting him to lend a hand. It was awkward, strange, and yet somehow compelling. "Yes," she said quickly. I tried on my own, but I can't manage all of them. I heard from some neighbors that you know what you're doing. Please, I don't have anyone else to turn to. There was a quiet desperation in her voice, but it wasn't whining. It was honest, and John couldn't ignore it. He had always helped those in need, whether it was a neighbor or a passing traveler. But this was different. This was personal. John scratched the back of his head and tried to think of an excuse. He hadn't dealt with a situation like this in 20 years. Women, and he. Well, it had always been complicated. He didn't know if he still remembered how to talk to them, how to act naturally. And yet, there was something in her eyes, a quiet determination, that made him pause. Maybe, he thought, it wouldn't hurt to help. After all, it was just cows, and he had done this 1,000 times before.
"All right," he said finally, his voice steadying. "I'll help you.
But I warn you, it's been a long time since I worked with anyone else."
You'll have to follow my instructions carefully.
The woman smiled, relief spreading across her face. Brr.
Thank you, she said. I promise I'll listen.
Breath. John grabbed his hat and led her toward the barn. The farm smelled of hay and fresh earth, the scent comforting in its familiarity. The cows looked up as they approached, curious but calm. John motioned for her to stand back a little. First, you have to understand the cows, he said. They respond to calm voices and gentle hands. If you're nervous, they'll sense it. Keep your movements slow, and they'll cooperate. The woman nodded, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. John could see she was serious about learning, and that gave him a strange sense of satisfaction. Bert. Teaching her would be different from working alone. But perhaps that was good. Perhaps he needed something different in his life, even if just for a short time. He demonstrated the first steps, showing her how to approach the cows, how to position herself, and how to make the animals feel comfortable. She followed closely, mimicking his movements. Brrr. John noticed small things. How she tilted her head to study him, how she hesitated before moving her hands. It reminded him of teaching a young apprentice, someone eager to learn but uncertain of their own abilities. Bear. Hours passed, and the work was slow but steady. The cows were stubborn at times, requiring patience and persistence. Urge. Milk spilled occasionally, and the woman laughed when a cow nudged her gently, tipping the bucket over. John found himself smiling too, something he hadn't done in a long time. Narration. The awkwardness was still there, but it was mixed with humor and the shared experience of working together. Birth. For the first time in decades, he felt a spark of connection. Not romantic, not even necessarily deep friendship yet, but a reminder that human interaction could be rewarding and even fun. During a short break, they sat on the steps of the barn drinking water and wiping sweat from their foreheads. The woman looked around at the farm, taking in the worn fences, the rolling fields, and the old farmhouse. It's beautiful here, she said quietly. Bert. I can see why you've stayed all these years. John nodded, feeling a little pride swell in his chest. Yes, it was simple, and yes, it was isolated, but it was his life, and he had built it with his own hands. Inspiration. A few people appreciated that, but she seemed to. She asked questions about the farm, about the cows, about how he had managed everything alone for so long. John answered honestly, surprising himself with how easy it was to talk. Her presence wasn't intrusive. It was refreshing. She listened, really listened, and he realized he had missed that. Someone who genuinely wanted to hear about his life. They laughed at minor mishaps, like a calf that refused to come to the gate or a bucket that tipped over at the wrong moment. The work continued, but it had transformed into something more than routine. It was a shared experience, a small adventure in the quiet of the countryside.
By late afternoon, the chores were nearly finished, and
Preparation. The woman had learned the basics, though she still had a lot to master. John looked at her, realizing he felt a strange mixture of pride and protectiveness.
She wasn't just learning to milk cows. She was learning to trust someone after taking a risk by coming here. And he, after 20 years of solitude, was remembering what it felt like to connect with another person.
As they walked back to the farmhouse, the woman thanked him again. I don't know what I would have done without your help today, she said sincerely.
John shrugged modestly, unused to such gratitude, but warmed by it nonetheless. It's no problem.
Just take care of the cows and they'll take care of you, he replied, a hint of humor in his voice. She laughed, the sound light and clear, echoing in the fields. John hadn't realized how much he had missed the sound of laughter, especially one that wasn't forced or distant. That evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with streaks of pink and orange, John sat alone on the porch once more, sipping his coffee. Brrr. He reflected on the day and the unexpected visitor who had stirred something long dormant inside him. For the first time in 20 years, he didn't feel quite so alone. The farm was still quiet, the animals still calm, but there was now a sense of possibility, a reminder that life could bring surprises even to those who thought they had settled into routine and solitude. John knew this was only the beginning. The woman would likely return for more help, more guidance, and maybe even just to share a conversation. And while he couldn't predict what would happen next, he felt ready to face it. The world outside his farm, outside his quiet life, was uncertain. But perhaps it wasn't something to fear. Perhaps it was something to embrace, even if just a little, one day at a time. And with that thought, he finished his coffee, watched the last rays of sun dip below the horizon, and felt a strange, unfamiliar warmth in his chest. A day that had started like any other had turned into something extraordinary, and John knew that his life, though long and solitary, had room yet for new experiences, laughter, and maybe even a connection he hadn't felt in decades. Narration. The next morning the farm was calm, the kind of calm that made everything feel slower and more deliberate. John was up before the sun, as always, walking along the fence line to check for any breaks or weak spots. The cows were already stirring, their low moos carrying across the fields. Life on the farm was predictable, but John welcomed the routine. After all, after 20 years of solitude, he had learned to appreciate the quiet order of things. Just as he finished inspecting the fence near the barn, he heard the familiar crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. He turned, squinting at the early light, and saw her car pull up. The young woman from the day before stepped out, carrying her small bag once again. This time, she moved with more confidence, but there was still a hint of hesitation in her steps. John felt a small jolt in his chest. He hadn't expected to be glad to see anyone in years. Yet there she was, and somehow, it felt good. "Morning," she called, waving as she approached. Narration. John nodded, tipping his hat slightly. "Morning," he replied.
Ready to work?
Narration. "I practiced a little yesterday evening, but I'm sure I still have a lot to learn." John chuckled, a low, genuine sound. "You'll learn faster than you think. It just takes patience, and the cows respect patience more than anything else." The barn smelled of hay and earth as they entered, the familiar scent grounding John in a way that he hadn't realized he needed. He handed her a pair of gloves and demonstrated again the proper way to approach the cows, emphasizing gentle movements and calm speech. Narration. But she watched closely, absorbing every word. John noticed that her hands were steady, her eyes alert. She was eager to do things correctly, and that kind of determination reminded him of himself when he had first taken over the farm years ago. As they moved through the barn, John offered instructions with a mixture of seriousness and humor. "Remember, they're stubborn creatures," he said, pointing to a cow that refused to step closer. "They'll test you. But if you stay calm, they'll cooperate." "I think they know I'm new at this." "Maybe," John said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Or maybe they just know you're nervous." "Either way, stay calm, and you'll win them over." The work was slower today, partly because she wanted to get everything right, and partly because John was taking the time to explain small details. How to feel the cow's movements, how to anticipate when a kick might come, and how to adjust the milking technique for different cows. He was surprised at how much he enjoyed teaching. There was a rhythm to the work, but there was also a rhythm to their interaction, a quiet conversation without words. Between tasks, they spoke about small things, the weather, the crops, the challenges of farm life. John found himself telling stories he hadn't shared with anyone in years. He spoke of storms he had weathered alone, of calves that had survived against the odds, and of long nights spent repairing fences by lantern light. She listened intently, sometimes asking questions, sometimes simply nodding. Her interest was genuine, and that made John feel valued in a way he hadn't experienced in decades. Occasionally there were small mishaps, buckets tipped, a cow moved unexpectedly, or a calf wandered into the wrong pen. Each time they laughed together, a shared amusement that made the barn feel warmer, livelier, more human. John realized that he had missed this simple joy, the connection formed through shared effort and small victories. By midday, the sun was high and the work had become more comfortable for her. She had learned enough to handle most of the milking on her own, though John remained nearby, guiding her hands and offering advice. He noticed that she was growing more confident, moving with steadier hands and a calmer demeanor. It was satisfying to see someone learn, and he felt a quiet pride in being able to help her. During a break, they sat outside the barn on a stack of hay bales, sipping water and wiping sweat from their foreheads. The woman looked out over the fields, breathing in the scent of grass and earth.
"This place is incredible,"
she said softly.
I can't imagine having to manage it all alone.
John smiled, feeling a mix of pride and humility. "It's a lot of work," he admitted.
But it's rewarding. You get used to the rhythm of it, and it becomes part of you. Breaths. The land, the animals, they depend on you, and in return you find something steady, something reliable.
"I think I understand. There's a peace here, even if it's hard work."
It's John looked at her, noting the seriousness in her expression. He realized that she wasn't just learning about milking cows. She was learning about patience, responsibility, and respect for the life around her. And in a way, he too was learning something. He was remembering what it felt like to guide, to teach, to connect with someone outside his routine life. They returned to the barn, resuming the work with renewed energy. The cows were calmer now, responding better to her hands and voice. John felt a subtle shift, as though the presence of another person was smoothing the edges of his long-held solitude. He had forgotten what it felt like to feel useful in someone else's eyes, to share his knowledge and see it appreciated. As the afternoon wore on, they worked in comfortable silence at times, the only sounds the low hum of the cows and the gentle splashing of milk into the buckets. Occasionally, John would offer a tip or correct a movement, and she would adjust immediately, nodding with concentration.
There was trust building here, small but noticeable.
She trusted him to guide her, and he trusted her to respect his instructions. It was simple, but it was meaningful.
During another short break, she asked, "How did you manage all this by yourself for so long?"
John leaned back, wiping his forehead. "I had no choice," he said simply.
Life sometimes leaves you alone, and you either adjust or give up. I chose to adjust. It wasn't always easy and it wasn't always fun, but it worked. And now, well, now it's a little different. She smiled softly, as if understanding more than he was saying. It must take a lot of strength to keep going all these years. He shrugged, though he felt a small warmth at her words. Strength, patience, stubbornness. Mostly stubbornness, he admitted with a faint chuckle. By late afternoon, the last of the milk had been collected, and the cows were contentedly returning to their pens. The woman wiped her hands on her apron and looked at him, a mixture of gratitude and admiration in her eyes.
I can't thank you enough, she said sincerely.
Burr, you've taught me so much today. I feel like I could actually handle this on my own now.
John nodded, feeling a rare sense of fulfillment.
You'll do fine, he said. Just remember what I told you. Stay calm, be patient, and respect the animals.
Bree, they'll respond to that, and so will life in its own way. As they walked back to the farmhouse, the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, painting the fields in gold and orange. The day had been long and tiring, but it had been good. Good for the work, good for the animals, and good in a way that neither of them had expected. That evening, after dinner, John sat on the porch watching the stars begin to appear in the sky. Inspiration. He reflected on the day, on the unexpected presence of the young woman, and on how it had stirred something inside him he hadn't felt for years. She had come needing help, yes, but she had given him something in return. A reminder that life could still surprise, that connection was possible, and that even a man who had lived alone for 20 years could find joy in another person's company. Inspiration. He smiled quietly to himself, a small, genuine smile. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he felt a small anticipation, a curiosity. He knew she would return, and he was almost looking forward to it. Almost. After 20 years of routine and solitude, that was saying something. The farm was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty. The work had been hard, but it had been shared. The lessons had been learned, and the bonds, however small, had begun to form. John felt a strange comfort, a reassurance that life, even in its most ordinary moments, could still hold unexpected meaning. And somewhere in the back of his mind he realized that this was only the beginning. The days ahead would bring more work, more laughter, and perhaps more moments that challenged his solitude. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't mind. For the first time in 20 years, he felt that life, with all its unpredictability, could still be worth opening up to. The next few days settled into a quiet routine, but it was a routine unlike any John had experienced in years. The young woman returned each morning, her presence bringing a subtle change to the farm. She moved with more confidence now, her hands steady as she worked with the cows, her voice calm when giving instructions to herself. John observed her carefully, noting the small improvements with a quiet pride. Teaching her was no longer just a duty. It had become something he looked forward to each day. That morning, the sun rose slowly over the misty fields, the dew glinting like tiny diamonds on the grass. John walked to the barn first, inspecting the fences and gates before starting any chores. The cows were already awake, stretching and lowing softly. The woman arrived shortly after, carrying her usual bag and greeting him with a friendly smile. "Good morning," she said brightly. "I've been thinking about what you taught me yesterday." John nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "That's good, Today we'll practice a few more things. You've done well so far, but there's always room to improve." They entered the barn together, and he began showing her how to anticipate the cow's behavior, how to read subtle movements, the twitch of an ear, the shift of weight, the gentle signs of impatience or curiosity. She watched carefully, her brow furrowed in concentration, but she didn't frown. Her eagerness to learn reminded John of a younger version of himself, a time when life had been full of questions and challenges and no guide but his own instincts. As they worked, John began to open up more about his life. He told her about the storms he had faced alone, harsh winters, floods, and nights spent patching fences by lantern light. He spoke of calves that hadn't survived and others that had thrived against all odds. He didn't often talk about these things to anyone, but with her, it felt natural. She listened intently, nodding at the right moments, sometimes asking thoughtful questions.
I can't imagine doing all of this by myself, she said, her voice soft.
Inspiration. It must take a lot of patience. John chuckled. It does. And stubbornness too, he said. Sometimes you just have to keep going, even when it seems impossible. The animals will teach you lessons you didn't expect, and sometimes they'll surprise you in ways you never imagined. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity.
I think animals are amazing. They're honest, in their own way.
John nodded slowly, feeling a quiet warmth in his chest.
It had been a long time since anyone had shared his appreciation for the simple truths of farm life.
Most people couldn't understand the patience, the routine, the attention to detail that it required. But she did.
She saw it, and more importantly, she respected it. The morning passed in a rhythm of work and conversation.
Inspiration. Occasionally, a cow would nudge her with unexpected force, tipping the bucket over, and they would both laugh. Inspiration. Each small mishap, each minor disaster, seemed to strengthen the bond between them. John realized that he hadn't laughed like this in years, not truly, with someone who shared the moment fully. By late morning, the barn was filled with the soft sounds of milking, the low hum of contented cows, and the quiet murmur of conversation. John observed her carefully, noting how her hands moved with more confidence, how her voice was calmer when speaking to the animals. She was learning, yes, but she was also adapting to the rhythm of the farm, to the patience and care that life here demanded. And in turn, John was learning too. He was learning what it felt like to share knowledge, to guide someone, to connect without expectation. During a short break, they sat outside the barn on the edge of a haystack, the sunlight warm on their faces. Inspiration. The woman wiped sweat from her forehead and looked around at the farm.
I think I'm beginning to understand why people stay here, she said.
Inspiration. It's peaceful, but not boring. There's always something to do, something to notice.
It makes you feel alive. John smiled, quietly pleased.
Inspiration. That's the thing about this life, he said. It's simple, yes, but it teaches you things you can't learn anywhere else. Patience, resilience, attention to detail, and sometimes the quiet moments are the most important.
Inspiration.
She nodded thoughtfully. I can see that.
I think I've been rushing through life too much. I forget to notice the small things. He looked at her, surprised by the insight in her words.
It's easy to do, he said.
Most people are in a hurry, always moving from one thing to another. But here, you learn to slow down, to pay attention, and you start to notice the world in ways you never did before. The rest of the day continued with the usual work, milking, feeding, and checking on the animals, but now there was a quiet understanding between them.